So my name is Jan Houben, and full passport name is Johannes Houben, so that you see on my badge today. So I'm Jan Houben from the Netherlands, in Europe, of course, and then I started to study Sanskrit after. First I studied 1 year of psychology at the university, then I thought, let me change to Sanskrit. So after that I continued in the Sanskrit department in Utrecht University in the Netherlands, and that has a very good tradition of learning since several centuries. That is in Utrecht city, but at present this department is no more existing, but at that time there was this seat of learning by Professor Jan Gonda was there at that time, and later on Professor Bodewitz, and then I'm the student of Professor Bodewitz. So in the domain of Vedic studies, Vedic texts, Vedic ritual. And in addition, I'm interested in language. I was always interested in language. So language and the linguistic theories. And my attention was captured by a great linguist from India, and his name is Bajracharya. He is in the tradition of Panini, but Panini is 350 BC, and he was 500, 600 AD, after beginning of our era. So that was my PhD thesis, was about Bhartrihari, which was a very difficult text and a great challenge, but thanks to my guides, Professor Ashoka Kluchkar and Johannes Bronkhorst, and also my professor from Utrecht, Bodewitz, I could bring that project to a good end, and also it was published in the Netherlands. And in the same time, I did my research on Vedic. So one book was published in Delhi in '91 about Vedic ritual, about Taittiriya, Aranyaka, quite specific text, which had not yet been studied much. So this is my background, and after that I was teaching as associate professor in Leiden University for several years. I did several projects, and then in 2002 I was appointed in full professor in Paris, at the École Pratique des Hautes Études, which is a renowned center of learning. It was founded in 1868. There are great scholars have been there, like Bergaigne, Renou, Louis Renou, and others, and Filiosa, Pierre-Sylvain Filiosa. So in that tradition, I continued my teaching and my research. And one specialty of our institute is that our teaching is on advanced level. So, and it is also connected to our research. So we don't give the introduction to Sanskrit like the ABC, or we suppose that students should already know quite good Sanskrit, and then we read more the advanced texts in connection with our research. And then at the end of the year, every year, we write a report of our original research plus teaching. They go together, and that report is every year published. So in the course of time, that becomes a kind of summary of my research then. And the report is in French, but because I thought that French, it's not everyone reads easily French, except for people in France. But to make it more accessible to a larger group of readers, I always summarize my French report in Sanskrit. So I compose every year a few verses to summarize my research results. And then I'm coming to India, mostly to India since '86. That was the first time, and after that, from 1990, I'm coming almost every year. Mostly, I came always to Pune University, which has a great name. It had that time also there were scholars like S.D. Joshi, and Pal Sule and Pandit Bhagavat Shastri. So it was always, I was both teaching and following courses here. In the winter I came to India. So like that, when I was appointed in Paris, the winter time was no more available for me to come to India, because that is exactly the time I'm teaching there. So it became more a summer time that I'm in India. And then with my wife, we went to Orissa and other places. So I also developed interest. Means my MA thesis, which was also published in Delhi, that was about the Pravargya ritual. It was a text of a special, very special, rare ritual, and then I was curious to see that in real life. So I came to in Maharashtra. I found some groups who are performing those rituals, and I could film that. So that became a film about the ritual. So so I find it important to study the old text, but also to see how they were once upon very lively ritual was going on, and to some extent, to a marginal extent, they are still executed today also, these rituals. And also I noticed that if you film the ritual, then the old text, it is more easy to understand, because if you only see the old text, it is sometimes very difficult to understand what the author wanted to say. But if you see how it is performed, then suddenly you understand how it was meant to be, how the meaning of the mantra, also the prayers, they are recited in a certain context. So if you see the exact ritual context of the mantra, you will understand much better what it means. So in that sense, I also stayed in some ashram where the students were studying Veda. So I filmed them, and so I have a lot of film about this these schools, the schools in India where the Veda is studied and also practiced with rituals. Then in the sense of philosophy, this Bhartrihari, the language philosopher, has always been very fascinating for me. So I have been comparing, to make it more understandable. It is useful to compare him with linguists of modern time. So in that sense, I have started to compare him with a French linguist of 1913. He passed away in 1913. His name is de Saussure. So that is a red line in my research, you can say, the comparison of Bhartrihari and de Saussure. But mainly we study Bhartrihari in his own terms, with the texts, with the Sanskrit text, by understanding the commentaries, etc. But at some level also we want to know how much is it similar to the linguistic thinking in Europe. And my first paper in 87 was about Bhartrihari and de Saussure, and that paper is also published in the proceedings which are published in the Indologica Taurinensia. And it so happens that this year also, for this conference, I also have prepared a paper on Bhartrihari and de Saussure, but in that time it was a very detailed subject, very detailed problem which I addressed, the nature of the signifier in language. You have signifier and signified. And today, it means tomorrow, my paper will be there. It is a much broader comparison of the deeper underlying presuppositions of this European scholar de Saussure and the Indian scholar Bhartrihari. And Bhartrihari is also important for understanding the Paninian tradition. You mentioned Panini, so his grammar is very advanced, as you know. So there are lists of phonemes, there are lists of roots, and also the Ganapatas there. So there are so many, several lists are kind of appendix, annex to the rule system. So the system of rules, 4,000 rules, almost 4,000 rules, and 2,000 roots. They together, with them you can describe the whole language. So that is the organization itself is very fascinating, and he has been studied also from the point of view of modern linguistics. So which was the grammar which was in fashion in the 70s. That was Chomsky generative grammar. So his grammar has been studied from that point of view. But it turns out that he can equally be studied from a very different point of view, construction grammar. And construction grammar, it is a theory which takes the lexical elements and the rules as a continuum. And in fact, if we see the applied linguistic IDs for applied software, like for instance Google Translate, or it is rather close to construction grammar than to generative grammar. So that approach is very close to the system of Panini. And it is also, it turns out that Bhattacharya, his theoretical model suits also this grammar of Panini. Panini gives just the grammar and the rules and the list of elements, but he doesn't give a theory of grammar, but it must have been there implicitly, but he doesn't discuss the theory. But that theory is brought forward in the work of Bhattacharya. Several centuries later than Panini. So these are very advanced texts. Also the Veda, we have the mantras of the Veda which can be studied, and there is some discussion about Veda apaurusheyatva, or the authorlessness of the Veda. So the Veda the poetry is so remarkably impressive as a whole that it is felt that it cannot be made by a simple author. It must be authorless, but still there are these rishis. So then what have they been doing? So there is both an aparusheya part, which is the beauty, let's say, of the profoundness of the mantras, but there is still a Paurusheya aspect to the Vedic hymns, because there are always the rishis are mentioned for each hymn. So to explore that problem, I took a very new approach, because from the Paurusheya point of view, you might feel that the language is so divine that it is beyond human language. But from the Paurusheya point of view, the language of the Veda, of Rig Veda, must be in fact also a human language, which could be spoken that time. And to test that hypothesis, which I wrote in an article which is online available 2018, there I showed that the Vedic language should in fact be very clear and very near to the Avesta, the language of ancient Iran. And in that article I explored that problem from theoretical point of view. Then later, now I have been started to test it in reality by translating the Vedic hymns for the first time into Avestan. Till now, no one has done that, but my forthcoming article study about that will appear soon. So If we do that, we see that these languages are in fact very close, very near. Some differences are there, and even you can translate the Vedic language into Pali, which shows how lively the language must have been. So if a Pali-speaking person would hear the Vedic language, he would understand, let's say, 80%. So it shows how close the Vedic language was to the spoken or the actively used language. Although we don't know directly how was that language in that time. We only have the Pali is of course a bookish language. It's not really the spoken language, but it's very close. But the Prakrit of the inscriptions of Ashoka, they are also very close in time. So anyway, so there are several problems which remain fascinating, and many scholars are working on several aspects, and I told you some of my angles of approach to the, especially Vedic studies and grammar and philosophy of grammar are the domains which interest me most. So it's a great pleasure to be back in Kathmandu. We came last year also. Kathmandu is a very precious place because it contains also the Vedic tradition for which India is famous. There is also some aspects are lively in Kathmandu. There is this the Agnishala. We have been doing a film there. Some colleagues of mine have made a film in 1992, which we are still editing. So we can see how the original Indian Agnihotra is integrated in the Newar culture. And so it shows how the Vedic tradition was very lively here, and it was approached from a tantric point of view. So we can see that Nepal has a very rich heritage of Sanskritic traditions, both Bauddha and Vaidika, I would say. Hindu, you say maybe, but I would say Vaidika also. So it's a fascinating place, and to some extent, when we come here, we feel that two traditions are meeting here. But I think it is rather that they are in their original unity. In the past, they were not separate, but in other countries, they have been separated. Buddhism is separate from Hinduism, but here they are harmoniously amalgamated together in a very lively tradition. And we see sometimes when we walk in the street in Patan, then we see some procession, and so many aspects are very lively here, which of course is a quite unique situation. And so it's a great moment that we have this World Sanskrit Conference now here in this place where Sanskrit is very lively, although the general public is not always aware of it, but in fact it is really Sanskritic culture is there in Buddhist religion, in Hindu religion, in the so it is also, it helps to understand the language, many words in the language, even Newar language, although there is maybe a Tibetan linguistic link for the Newar language, but the vocabulary, there is much Sanskrit also in Newar, and then in the Nepali has of course Hindi type language. So by studying Sanskrit, I think you can understand also many aspects of the deeper culture, several cultures of Nepal. So in that sense, I think it is enrichment, and for students in Nepal, if they study Sanskrit, they can have a more wide appreciation for many aspects of their own culture. So I think that is a great thing, that you can study Sanskrit from the books, but also from the temples which are active, the activities which are embedded in the culture. So this was a little monologue. I hope it will express a little bit my enthusiasm, personal enthusiasm for Sanskrit. It's a great language with a very great scientific basis in this grammar. In grammar, India is one of the first countries which could really go to the roots and below the roots. And understand the deepest mechanics of how the language is used and how it is applied. In the West, there has also been search for underlying elements, and then we in the West we found maybe the elements, the chemical elements, but the East found the linguistic elements which are at the basis of language. Of course, there is also alchemy tradition in India and in Nepal, which maybe didn't go to the deepest level of atoms, etc. But as far as language is concerned, the science has been always very advanced in a very ancient time, in 350 BC with Panini. So there are many fascinating aspects which need further exploration. We know already very much, and there is enough for students to study for many years. But after that, there is also a lot to explore further. There are still many things which we don't know well enough, and so these are my fields of interest. And if you have any more question for any specific thing which interests you, please don't hesitate to ask. But so that is, and now this conference is very impressive because the Rashtrapati himself, he is a Sanskritist, or he knows Sanskrit apparently, and which is of course a very rare situation. No other country in the world probably that exists. So it is a rich domain of study, and also in art, expressive art, in dance, Natya Shastra. It can Sanskrit can enrich many fields of life. So it deserves to be studied in a very open-minded way, scientific, with the same scientific mind with which we study matter, let's say physics, or we should also study Sanskrit and Vedic language. So that's it, maybe. I was studying psychology, and I was interested in the, let's say, the human mind, and then I discovered Bhagavad Gita, and I found it very impressive. I thought that this really tells you a lot about human mind, and then in addition, I was always studying Greek and Latin at high school. So and I, as a student, when I was reading Greek and Latin, I could understand that if you read it in the original language, it is much more rich. If you read Plato in Greek, then you understand how the argument is going. But if in the translation, it looks a little blurred. So after knowing about Bhagavad Gita, I thought, no, I should read it in the own language, in the original language. So then, in addition, Sanskrit is also related to Greek and Latin, so that was an extra motivation that I wanted to know how is that Sanskrit language. So, so the original motivation, it was Bhagavad Gita and interest in the classical languages, like to really to see how is this these interesting sayings of Bhagavad Gita, how is it expressed in the original language. And once I studied, I could see that grammatically, Bhagavad Gita is not so difficult. The meaning is very profound, but grammatically it is not so difficult. So I went to more difficult texts, let's say, and Vakipadiya was a text which was not very much studied at that time. So I selected a chapter which was not translated, as the commentary on it was not yet translated. So I took it as a challenge to do that, and then that became my PhD thesis. So gradually, step by step. But the first moment, if you want to know the first moment, that was maybe Bhagavad Gita, and to read it in the original language. So that was the motivation. And then I could notice that after 1-2 years Sanskrit, already you understand everything. Like, it is not so difficult from a grammatical point of view. And then from one point I thought, let me make it more difficult, and I went to more difficult subjects. How it is, we have the Sanskrit word dwara, door, and in fact door or deur in Dutch, they go back to some, you feel they have some underlying root which has gone in different directions. Like dwara is the Sanskrit way, and deur is the Tür in German. It is so we have shatam, and we have the 100, means we have the we can see that the many words, or even if we say mata, pita, it is in Latin, it is also, we have the pater and mater. So there are many words, especially if it comes to relationships, which are very, in a community, the relationship terms often they remain stable. And we see that in the European languages, they are all very near to each other. And also the words for numbers, like tri, it is also you recognize it in Greek and in Latin, and so we have to. So that is the relationship. There is a relationship, but exactly how it is, that is again a different study. But it makes it very fascinating. You feel it is a related. It's like you learn the dialect of a neighbor, or something like a neighboring dialect. It is quite fascinating to see. You recognize some words, but they sometimes mean slightly different than what you think it could mean. So gradually, you discover that many words are similar, and some are also different. So. Linguistics itself, or comparative linguistics, is not my main interest, but I found it, as in the beginning, I found it very fascinating, and then I left that a little bit, because then you stick more to the word meaning, and I'm more interested in the sentence meaning, which is like the philosophy, this philosophical statements, and so. That is about this Greek and Latin. They are somehow closely related, but not exactly the same. And there must be some underlying unity, but we don't know. It is in the midst of times. It has disappeared. Some scholars, they make the reconstruction. They want to try to reconstruct how was that earlier language, but that is sometimes a little theoretical. So I prefer the full-fledged language as it is really used in some communities. So that is about this Greek and Latin. They are somehow closely related, but not exactly the same. And there must be some underlying unity, but we don't know. It is in the midst of times. It has disappeared. Some scholars, they make the reconstruction. They want to try to reconstruct how was that earlier language, but that is sometimes a little theoretical. So I prefer the full-fledged language as it is really used in some community, rather than having an abstract language which was maybe spoken by someone or maybe not. So that is Indo-European is there, and then, but I prefer to come back to Sanskrit and also compare it with Avesta, which is another concrete language. So Instead of going to some very distant source, I'm more interested in how Vedic Sanskrit was comparing with contemporaneous ancient languages. Like there must have been a time that the Vedic poet could also understand what the Iranian-speaking priest was saying, and gradually it has grown more separate. But at some old stage, there must have been mutual comprehensibility. So that is I'm not going to all Indo-European languages, but just a few, and comparing Vedic and Avestan. That is quite clarifying, because each concept has also a deeper religious implication. So, for instance, the Rishi, which we have in Vedic. If we compare it with Avestan, we see there is no comparable concept. The Rishi in the Veda is a plurality. From the first fairy hymn onwards, there is a plurality of rishis, the seers or the inspired poets. But in Avestan, we don't find such. There's perhaps one time or two times that the word rishi is used in singular, never in plural. And there it applies to Zarathustra, and we don't know whether it really means inspired poet or not. So like that, the comparison clarifies also the differences between these two communities, which at one moment they were overlapping. Like if we see Gandhara area, what is now Pakistan, it was part of Iranian empire, but it was also part of the Indian world. So they were overlapping, so they must have met on the street, maybe, I don't know. But I think they must have been mutually understandable. Like if you have two dialects from Nepal, sometimes you can understand each other, sometimes it's a little too far. And so that is fascinating, I think, to try to go back to that time, how they might have understood each other, rather than taking only one word and comparing it with the Baltic equivalent, or the so if you stick to the level of isolated words, you have one aspect. But if you say the whole statement, if you try to translate the whole Vedic mantra into Avestan, you are confronted with different problems than if you study the similarity of isolated words. So, what was the question? I forgot.
Sanskrit and Greek Latin.
Yeah, Greek Latin. Then yes. So that they are somehow, there is some similarity. They are maybe distant dialects or but they went in a different direction. I'm more interested to go back to the place where they were close than to see where they all went. But I'm not interested in going to reconstruct an artificial origin. Like we have no data about that. We can estimate like how it would have been, but we cannot test the pre-Vedic time. We cannot really test. We have some intuitions, but no final conclusion there.